everyone, how are you? This is Sheree Burton, and this is Women Seeking Wholeness. And as I say every week, this is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. Y'all are going to love this episode with Lana Shlafer, and I'll get into what we're going to talk about here in a minute. Remember that you can follow my day-to-day stuff on Instagram, Sheree.Burton, as well as ask to join the Women Seeking Wholeness Facebook group. This episode actually will air when I am in the middle, and I do mean middle, of a sacred plant ceremony journey. I'm going to be doing ayahuasca 5 nights in a row at a place called Rhythmia in Costa Rica. So I will be talking about my journey when I return. It's very, very vulnerable for me to even talk about that I'm going to be doing this. Some people may raise their eyebrows about it, but it's the next right step for me. The plant has been calling me, they call her grandmother actually, the ayahuasca plant, for some time. I was actually supposed to go do this back in April of 2020, and because of COVID, it was delayed. So stay tuned for my solo episode when I return so that you can learn about my experience. It may serve you, whether you do decide to ever do trauma release or any kind of sacred work with medicine and plants from these indigenous places on the earth where there's so much wisdom and knowledge to be gained by going within your own body to access parts of your subconscious and different ways that you attach to things and ways that you can more fully connect to God, to your inner soul and your divine self. So stay tuned for that. All right. Lana Shlafer is a mindset coach. She's a podcast host of Manifest That Miracle, which is also the same name of her book, Manifest That Miracle. Learn why you don't have what you want and how to get it. So we get really real in this episode about some of the misconceptions in the law of attraction and how it's misconstrued and how it's taught in ways that maybe aren't as empowering or understood, about how we can land into giving ourselves permission to feel what we feel and know what we know, and how we can create safety for doing practices like meditation or breath work, things we're taught that we need to do to get still. And this was a good learning experience for me to talk to Lana about this, because in times past, I've always just told people, stop, breathe, receive, get still, breathe, connect to your breath. But for some people that can create a trauma response. And I know at one time in my life, it did for me as well. Lana's got this really energetic personality and kind of this no holds barred approach to coaching. So she's been featured in Forbes and many media outlets, on TV. She studied at UC Berkeley and the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. So you're in for a treat here. She's going to tell us about how to manifest, what it really means to manifest. You can also find this episode on my YouTube channel. I just barely started a new YouTube channel where I'm putting some of my podcast episodes on. So find me, Sheree Burton, on YouTube. Lana, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. So glad to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, this is going to be so fun. So share with our listeners a little bit about how you came into doing what you do. I mean, you have a whole story. And so if we could just concise it down into like the highlights of what brought you from, I'm guessing as I looked on your website and kind of read through your materials, we all go through a rite of passage to go into our true soul work in the world. And I know you had not so easy of a transition into what you're doing now, but wow. So maybe share with our listeners a little bit about where you came from.
I feel like it's, our context determines our content. And so I grew up in Russia and I came to the US when I was 12. So the first 12 of my years were in a very, very different world than afterwards. And the transition was a really pivotal point in my life because everything that I knew was no longer around me. And I was in a totally new place, not speaking the language, with parents who were trying to survive without any support. And so I experienced a lot of transition, a lot of hardship. And I actually had a realization just this year, because we're in the process of buying our home. We moved to Puerto Rico 2 years ago. My husband's owned homes, but I've never owned a home. And I realized that since 12 years old, I haven't had a sense of home, truly. And it's led me to create a sense of home within myself. I had to, or I didn't want to live. Right. So it was by necessity that I sort of tried to fulfill the dream, the vision that my parents had for us as immigrants and as kids who, you know, are trying to create some security in their life. And so I went to college, had all these job offers, was killing it in investment banking, and realized it was killing me. And it was at that moment that I had the highest, I think, fall from grace, because at least I had a vision of what's possible while I was working so hard trying to survive and make it through. But I had reached, at least at some level, the goals that I had set for myself. I was in a relationship with a person that I felt like I was going to marry. I had the dream job that I thought would be like the answer to everything. And I was more miserable than ever. So I had a quarter life crisis at that point. And I had a series of spiritual experiences that at the time I didn't even know were spiritual experiences. One of them was I went to Brazil with a friend and had this complete moment of the ocean speaking to me for the first time in my life. Now, mind you, I grew up atheist. I had, you know, no religious context, no new agey context, very like skeptical, gotta go get it, achievement mentality. The only, I guess, more Eastern philosophy or maybe more spirituality that I had was through yoga. And I did practice yoga through college. It gave me a lot of reprieve from eating disorders and things that were eating me up inside. But that would be some meditation here and there and some movement. But this was an experience that I had of the ocean saying, you don't, I could cry just going into it. You don't need to carry this anymore. Like you don't need to keep going. It almost felt like, where did this come from? And when I got back to investment banking after that trip, I couldn't just keep going. It's like something had shifted. There was a saturation point that I had reached. And then I decided, okay, I can't keep going like this, but I don't know an alternative. And so it was the biggest leap of faith to leave that. And I essentially packed up my bags and moved to Southern California, literally in search of something that I didn't know what I was in search of. And my parents thought I was crazy. My, you know, peers thought I was nuts. Like I didn't have a point that I was heading to. It's just that I knew that there had to be something more. And that took me on yoga teacher trainings and doing success coaching with university students and running through my savings and being dirt poor and moving in with my parents and being this high achiever to absolutely not achieving and facing all my demons. And at that point, I was like, I have nothing to lose. Like, I really don't want to live anyway. I don't see what the point is. And the one thing that kept drawing my attention was psychology, understanding the mind. I had taught yoga, I had done personal training, but I felt like the mind held all of these pieces that I never gave myself permission to go into. So I enrolled in this master's degree in transpersonal psychology. And I felt like I was just at this critical point where I had to give myself permission to really be myself. And I created a container within this program to do that transformation work, which led me to really fall in love with that deep transformation and then be able to create it as a career eventually. Sure. But so I come to this not because, you know, I wanted to manifest a dream home or whatever. I mean, that sounds lovely. I came to it because I didn't want to live.
It's a survival.
It was a survival. And I was at a point where I was like, well, let me try it. Let me see what this mindset can do. And I really feel like the part that's missing in current life coaching and law of attraction worlds is what I call in my book, the keyboard of emotions. The lower notes are not very much addressed, and they are sacred and necessary for the masterpiece that you'll create when you know how to play all the notes.
So when you say lower notes, are you talking, because I'm thinking in my mind, basic needs, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Are you talking about that with the low notes?
I'm talking about low notes being powerlessness, depression, anger, resentment,
more
judgment,
of the shadow
and then
aspects.
More of the shadow aspects, which I feel it's even calling them the shadow is not quite accurate in my eyes. I'm like, these are all valuable, important colors. You can't call this color.
They're not just some gray black shadow. Like
exactly.
They have fire and intensity and dynamism.
Power and beauty and sacredness. And so for me, it was a journey of really exploring both. And how I felt to be like a manifesting teacher and a mindset teacher and didn't go down the trauma healing route, for example, which, you know, I'm informed, so I bring it to the work that I do, is because I found that when I captivate people's imagination of what's possible, that is, Michael Beckwith has this great saying, you're pushed by pain until you're pulled by vision. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's enough being pushed by pain in our society. I really don't need to sort of add to it, but pulled by a vision, like really being able to create a vision out of the pain and then have that directionality, something that I didn't have. And when I found it was so meaningful to me. So I feel like that manifesting idea of what else is possible can capture you in a way that will allow you to walk through the fire.
Yeah, it's almost like the catalyst that drives the engine for you to be propelled or motivated.
Absolutely.
Pain is a motivator. And you know this, the human brain would rather run from pain than run to pleasure any day. So we are more, I guess you could say, subconsciously motivated to actually address pain points. But the fear mechanism pops in. This is where I wanted to pick your brain a little bit, literally pick your brain. That, you know, that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism in the amygdala, the fear response, where it's just our knee jerk. It's just our natural go-to based on traumas, based on past experiences. What's the override? There's a word I'm going to use, but I know in my mind, I feel like I know the override, but there's a word that encapsulates it. But share with me what you feel like a good override when you feel that fear response, when you feel that your knee-jerk patterning is just about ready to kick in and take over. How do you intervene?
I feel like my perspective on it is the desire to override as part or symptom of the problem. Mm-hmm. And that the override, if there is such a thing, would be to embrace. I always say that resisting resistance creates more resistance, and embracing resistance creates more embracing. Mm-hmm. And what people think they want is to get over there where that bad thing isn't there. Yeah. But avoidance mechanisms. Right. But it just never works, because wherever you go, there you are, and you're going to carry all of it with you, and it will show up in a different package. And it, you know, if it worked differently, we'd be talking about different things. But as it currently works in our reality, is that you can't move away from anything. You can't resist it enough. You can't fight it enough. So some people call it surrender. I'm not a huge fan of that word personally.
I don't like it either.
I used to like it. Yeah, it doesn't speak to me because it feels like passive, right? Like surrender kind of has this energy of like, oh, just like sit there. And, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Like fierce, like Kali, move into it, but without the resisting of what is, which you know, the best example that I feel like really made sense to me, even though I didn't know how to do it, was when I was giving birth to my twins. And the first baby, I just did not, how are you going to experience a contraction and you're supposed to relax? Like, it's an oxymoron. Like, my body is contracting and you're like, relax. It didn't make any sense until I completely tired myself out with like 21 hours of active labor. And I was like, okay, I just don't have any more energy to resist this. And it was really palpable for women who've had kids. It's usually an analogy that they can understand, right? You could also think of it like when you're just really tired, if you've run or done dancing, and all of a sudden you just sort of say, you know what, I got to finish because I got to get home, or I got to, I don't know, finish this class. So I'm just going to like stop trying and I'm just going to let it do this. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm just my body is just going to run the best way that it can. I'm not going to make it run. I'm just going to sort of be run. I'm going to stop dancing, or I'm going to stop. And so whatever that is called, which I wouldn't call surrender, I call it active allowing. You know, that would be the place where you are opening the doors to all of the support that was always there, that you had the door closed and couldn't receive. And for me, this was such a mind blowing, I mean, if I could swear, I'd swear in it, because it was just like, what? Like, you mean there's support out there that is for me? I mean, it was nowhere support in my
that
paradigm.
Is outside of you, that it's not all on you. I love that active allowing. My word for overriding fear, as you said, it's kind of an illusion. You have to be with it. But it was curiosity, and which I feel like really coincides with what you're saying about embracing, because
Totally.
get curious. What is this? Go into inquiry. That actually dispels a lot of those.
Well, it opens the door. It doesn't shut it and calls it bad, because if you color it bad, it cannot, you cannot derive any good from it. So anything that will allow you to keep that door a little bit open, that's what will flow in, the value, the meaning, the whatever it is that this experience is there to give you. And I think this goes to a deeper philosophy that everybody has to sort of decide for themselves. Is this universe ultimately good or ultimately bad? And I think that Einstein,
right?
Right?
Like you either see the universe as friendly or hostile.
Exactly. Right. And he says either everything's a miracle or nothing's a miracle. And that's one of the reasons why my book's titled Manifest That Miracle.
Which is beautiful.
So
yeah, because isn't it like also like synchronicity and noticing. So one of the feminine arts that I have loved and embraced, and this is not how I was raised to look at life. As you said, it was all about structure, and that just allowing and embracing peace was just not ingrained in us. But it was to notice, the art of noticing. And I think this is also kind of maybe where curiosity comes in. Yeah. It's like, oh, this fear or this feeling is arising. It has intensity to it. And just noticing. So being that observer, Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about this, and other spiritual teachers, where you just notice it. You don't identify with it. It's in you, but it is not you. Yeah. Like depression, for example, or melancholy. We may have it in us, but it is not us. And that's why I hate labels. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah. 100%. I've people have the saying labels are not for people, but for food. I'm like, even for food, I don't even like them for food. I don't know what to tell you. It's interesting, right? Because, and this is like a dance that I've danced, and my sort of philosophy on it and how I approach it keeps evolving. So I feel like, where I currently stand may not be where I will be. I hope, another Michael Beck was saying is, I hope my opinion changes in 10 years. You know what I mean? I hope I evolve and grow, so it's not the same. But I've noticed that people like me who have a lot of what I'm going to call trauma, which my trauma wasn't being in a war zone or some severe sexual abuse.
It feels just like you were just totally displaced.
It was,
or maybe
it formed my responses. Yeah, exactly. Is that it was very difficult for me to witness, because the act of witnessing was triggering the trauma. And so because it feels unsafe.
Right. Good
right.
Point.
And so at that level, my whole work and my whole life's purpose and my healing for myself is, how can I feel safe to feel unsafe? How can I reach like being deeper? Comfortable in being uncomfortable. Yes. And that is something that you can actually practice and develop and create. And we are ultimately, hardwired, just like we're hardwired to move away from pain, right? We're hardwired when we feel that connection with the greater, whatever you want to call it, it feels good. I mean, it. That feeling of love, the feeling of oneness, the feeling, it. You don't need to once you felt it, it's very palpable. Just like it's hard to describe being in love until you've been in love. But once you've been in love, it, even though it's very hard to put into words. And so I feel like one of the things that I tap into is helping people have real practical experiences where they connect to that, even for a millisecond, and then naming it and saying, this is what feeling safe feels like. Nothing in your life has changed. Same thing over here, over there, right. Same problems, but you just felt real relief, and even more than relief, maybe a real peace. And that's how it started for me, in milliseconds. And I think that for a long time I felt so broken, because I'm like, well, I can't, witnessing is a huge part of meditation, of yoga philosophy. And I just felt broken. Like I'm a terrible yoga student.
So glad you're bringing this up, because in saying that we need to observe or notice, if you haven't created a container of safety, this is why a lot of people avoid meditation. So I'm really glad that you're bringing this up. It's like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I plug in?
Yeah.
Why
I
is
say it in my book, I'm like, it's contraindicated. Traditional breath meditation is contraindicated for many people. Don't do it. There are a million other ways. The good thing is this is
let's talk about that, because I have my own mantra. I think I made it up. I know that I made it up. So if somebody else has made it up, like, I would be shocked. We're plugging into the same energy field, but stop, breathe, receive. So I want you to climb under that too, because as you're saying, observation, breath, taking a time out, for some people, being alone with themselves is not an option.
Yeah.
I know people who go into a trauma response. Like for me, that's literally bliss. Like put me in a cabin and give me something to write with, or to, being by myself, like that's heaven to me. Right. But yeah, so even in saying stop, breathe, and receive, what would you say to somebody who's in that fight or flight when they sit down to try to get still and they're closing their eyes and they're trying, okay, everything rides on the breath. I need to get rooted. I need to get grounded, but they just
say,
can't
get up and get out.
Connect in.
Get up, don't do it. I would straight up say you are 100% right that this doesn't feel safe. And now let's figure out what things in your life have made you feel safe. For me, it was finding little pebbles and anchors, going to the ocean. Now I live where the ocean is. We're literally oceanfront on the Caribbean Sea. And for 15 years, I imagined it in my head, right? Little girl from Siberia having this. It's such like a, but this is something that the ocean is my friend. It makes me feel safe. It gives me a container that allows me to experience and be curious about things that otherwise I wouldn't. Oftentimes, this is honestly this should be talked about. I had a grad school professor that said, all wounding is created in a relationship and all wounding can only be healed in relationship. And I remember arguing. I remember arguing so hard. I spent the entire lecture arguing, but I've come a full circle on that. Doesn't mean in relationship with that particular person, with that particular thing, but that everything is relational. And so I believe that at times when you really cannot feel safe, this would be the time when you are brushing your teeth isn't enough, which would be your daily meditation. Going to the dentist twice a year is not enough, which would be maybe doing a retreat or a yoga class. This is when you need a cavity filled or an endodontist to do a root canal. This is the time to do the work with a practitioner, with somebody who understands us. I think we just don't give it enough value, that you don't have to, and maybe you can't figure it out on your own. You're not built for this at this time. Once you experience it, that healing, then go and brush your teeth and go do your meditations and go do all these things. One of the common questions, people are like, well, it used to work and it doesn't. Like, I used to be able to do meditation. I used to be, it's like, well, what's happened in your life? Well, my mom died and this happened and this, so it triggered all this trauma response. So brushing your teeth isn't enough at that point, right? Sure. And so I feel like the relationship with things and creating relationships that feel safe is such a foreign concept. I mean, it was for me. Yeah. I wasn't taught about valuing feeling safe. I was taught to override everything that I feel and go and perform and do as you are supposed to, as a good daughter and a good employee and a good this and a good that.
Or swallow it down, stuff it, come back to it later until it shows up in physical form and you have to look at it.
Exactly. And it's
happening pandemically right now, literally.
Globally. Exactly. Yeah. And it needed to come up, right? All of that collective pain and resistance and trauma needed to come up. So it exploded, but it's been there. Like when people, are saying, it's like the trigger, that getting triggered by someone. I'm like, the person didn't install the trigger. It was already there. They just came, and no matter how gently they would touch you, if there's a trigger there, you're going to feel triggered, right? So I feel like this idea of, first of all, one size fits all sort of spirituality or healing is just really not resonant with me at all. And what I encourage people to do is really find little by little, 1 degree shifts is what adds up to an 180-degree turnaround. So it's not this heroic, like huge, massive, some sort of leap forward. It's what today makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, relieved, safer, better. It depends on what you're looking for. And on that emotional keyboard that I described, so you have your, anger and depression and sadness and grief on this these notes, and you have all your pro-social emotions here, you know, love and empathy and freedom and joy and all of that. And this is something I've had to retrain myself almost to remind and to understand, is that to create a truly fulfilling life, it is not just about avoiding all these other octaves and playing ding, 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 just on these notes. To create a massive masterpiece that feels fulfilling and moving and moves you and moves the world and ripples out around you is to play all the notes well. So the quality of your life is going to depend on how well you can play all the notes. And wherever you have a weakness, some people are all in the lower notes. It's a lot of my Russian upbringing. They are not going to go to the higher notes. You know, they need a little bit of work over there. A lot of, you know, American culture tends to be kind of avoidant and bypassy. So you're playing the higher notes. They do not have the ability, capacity. They've not developed the skills. They've not practiced playing in the lower notes. But if you want to have real freedom, and a real fulfillment, self-realization, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, you got to play the whole scale.
The whole dang thing. You know what that's bringing to the forefront of my consciousness right now is just holding duality. We've been, spiritual bypassing is a very real thing. I think Jungian was the first where I heard this, but yeah, when that uncomfortableness arises, and we are faced with it and we are confronted with it. The typical, like in spiritual communities, religious communities, new age, everything is get rid of it, like bypass it, tap it out, breathe it out. And it's like, okay, but it's going to come back cloaked in another form if I don't identify with it here, not identify with it as in like attached to it, but just observe it. Also, for me, what I'm learning right now is I'm an empath. And so I feel all that stuff that you're talking about. I feel the whole keyboard. And what I'm learning in my body is that I need to hold things like the sorrow of the world. You know, we all resonate with the collective unconscious, whether we want to admit it or not. We're swimming in it, in this sea of the world, right? Yeah. And so, you know, some people will be more attuned to different frequencies or different notes, as you say, on the keyboard than others. Yeah. Because of my family history, you know, I lost a sister to suicide. I lost an aunt to suicide. I have family members who are bipolar and who have addiction and different things. And I have more of that propensity to go into more of a dysthymic state, which is more of a, it's not clinical depression, but I just feel the weight of people's emotions and sadness. So I've been that way since I was a child. And what I'm learning is that it's okay to hold that and be in that, but not attach to it or over identify with it. So as you're talking, that's what I'm thinking, is that duality of like bliss and then, you know, grief or, you know, joy, whatever joy is, and anger. You know, these seeming states that we hold, and to somehow label that one is more spiritual than another. It's silly. Religious programming is doing this to us. Like, you must not have the spirit, or you must be deceived by Satan if you're angry or if you're super sad or whatever. Like, Jesus wasn't like that. So, you know, buck up and be like Jesus. You know, I'm just totally oversimplifying. Jesus
was actually like flipping tables
all over the place with his emotions. He was flipping tables. He was in deep sorrow, right? In, you know, holding that weight and that consciousness of humanity. Yeah. But he had learned to transmute it. And so have many other masters. So yeah, I'm interested in your take on that.
I loved everything you said, because look, there is no, even though there is oneness, in the oneness is everything, which I know gets us into some esoteric concepts, but it's always both and. Mm-hmm. You can be in grief and in sorrow and have moments of feeling good. You can be in whatever, and feel something else. It's not either or. You know, one of the complex things that a lot of people experience when they're in a relationship that's less than healthy, let's call it. It's complicated. They felt loved and safe at times, and they felt tremendously unloved and like it's both. So sure. To call it all good or all bad, I think is what we're really moving away from. The part that is fascinating to me is that we have a lot more room to influence where we create, like how we create a homeostasis, where we sort of land as our home base. And so a lot of my work is raising your home base slowly, deliberately, like with love, with compassion, not trying to jump 10 levels. But, you might start off, especially at certain times in your life where there was major, upheaval and breaking down and breaking open. You might start off feeling very unstable. So at that place, you might just want to feel more able to flow whatever emotion is happening. And that raises your homeostasis. At that point, you might feel safe enough with all the flow of emotions. They move a lot quicker. So you might say, now I want to really feel more creative and more, and so you go to another homeostasis and another and another and another. And that one is not better than another. The sure. analogy that I always think of is like, as kids, we grow and we change shoe size and clothes, and that's like normal. When you're 6, you wear shoe size, 2 or whatever it is, and then you wear clothes size this, and then you grow up. But something happens when we turn adults that we forget that we are still going through that. And the clothes that fit us last year or 10 years ago, who we were, what we wore, what we did.
Well, literally our entire physiology has shifted. Our cells have completely turned over. Yeah. And we're not the same person physiologically.
We don't have like the external shift the same way that kids do with stages. So we don't have the language for it. We don't have the approach to it to say, like, you've shifted. Certain cultures, you rename yourself at certain stages. You have all these like rituals or ways to acknowledge you're different, but we don't have that. It's like you turn 18 now until 100 years old or whatever, you're supposed to be the same, right? I mean, that's crazy. And I feel,
they're not, it's not like, I just keep going back to like, there's this homogenized way that we're encouraged to be that looks like spiritual or looks like developed or mature. And so we have this illusion of what we think that means. And, I just turned 52 and I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, it's so relative. I liked what you were talking about, the relational aspect. And another phrase comes to me, perception guides biology. We form these attachments to seeming safety strongholds, anchors, if you will, that that kept us safe at one time in our life.
Yeah.
That now completely create unsafety. You could call it a faith crisis. You could call it a midlife crisis. You could call it an awakening. There's so many names for this.
Yeah.
And there's public shaming and cultural shaming around when that happens.
And shame will lock all the pain up and you can't address it, be curious about or deal with it, right? Shame is just
the lowest calibrated.
Yeah, it is. Which is why having these conversations is so important. Just the act of standing with it is so revolutionary already, whatever happens after. But yeah, I think that from the law of attraction perspective, from like a pure, metaphysical perspective, whatever you perceive is what's going to be your truth. And so it's tricky to talk in these terms like this is what's out there, or even when I use terms like this is what our culture is, because really it's what I've perceived and now I'm reinforcing.
Yes.
Right. And what is going to be my truth? And then I'll attract all the people that resonate with that. And there's a whole other reality that this may not be the case.
That's why you outgrow certain tribes and systems, because you don't vibe the same that you did with that group think or whatever. Yeah, you shifted.
And so when you can recognize, and this was such a mind-blowing shift for me, that nothing out there can limit your happiness, your fulfillment, your growth, that it isn't about these things, these situations, whether it's personal on a micro level, where it's global on a macro level. It's not the pandemic. It's not your boss. It's not your partner. It's not whatever, the state of the world. It is that you have created a paradigm within you that the world is reflecting. That is that kind of radical ownership that really could very easily go into a victim shaming and bypassing. And so it's tricky to talk about it, but it's both and, right?
It's empowering and liberating. And it's also like, if you're not awake to that.
Yeah.
It could be, it could go victim-y, but if you have that radical self-accountability and you're like, I get to create everything is a mirror of how I feel about myself in this universe. I'm just reflecting it back to everybody else and they're playing a part for me.
Yeah. And so people say, well, what about, lack of privilege, or what about those things are completely real. And they, in my book, deserve to be seen and heard and witnessed and held sacred. So I am 100% for the Black Lives Matter movement and for all the things that are happening and rising to the surface. And I know that the solution isn't going to be to hammer in that nail continuously deeper and deeper. The solution is not at the level of the problem. The problem is really identifying what needs to shift. But the solution is in a different paradigm. And this is what I spend most of my time doing nowadays, is acknowledging the problem, because as a person who feels, I feel like we're all empathic to a degree. Some obviously recognize it more than others, right? But as you feel, it gives you, once you are aware of it, a point of choice. Mm-hmm. What do I want to focus on? Is it the pain of this, which sometimes is a very valuable choice? Is I'm not really
and identifying, for others, Or
do I feel like I really felt this experience? I'm not resisting anything. And now I feel called like a wave. It's going to come in and out, right? Okay, great. The wave came in. Now the going out part is going to be, what is it that I'm called to create? What is it that the world is calling for? And you bring your attention to that vision, which honestly has to come from your imagination because it's not in your reality. Yeah. That's what separates us from almost any other species, right? The use of our imagination, which is so underused. We are not trained to use we're trained out of using it a lot of times. And we are living with this great tool that we don't know how to direct in a way that we're day nightmaring. So we're using it in a way that sometimes punishes us instead of saying, I see this impossible, difficult, terrible thing in the world. What is it that I want to create? What is it that I want to see? What could be possible, right? Yeah. And you really need to acknowledge what is. It's like in a GPS, you have to know where you're located in order to program a destination and find a way. Most people don't want to acknowledge where they are. They're just saying, take me over there. And the GPS like, well, I don't know where you are. How am I going to direct you there?
I had a teacher one time that was like trying to get me to figure out what I wanted because I was afraid to want what I wanted. And he's actually from India, and I'll be up. He's on an upcoming episode. But he said, imagine that you're going through a drive-through to get lunch, and you get to the drive-through teller or whatever place, and they're like, "Can I help you?" And you're like, "I don't know." Oh, what do you want? Oh, I don't know. Like, that's a metaphor, right? For we can order anything that we want.
Sometimes you won't like it, and that's okay too.
And if we see this menu and there's nothing on there that we want, then we can be like, no, I don't want that.
Yep.
And we get to give ourselves that permission.
Yes. And the permission is to want and to change your mind, meaning to move towards another want and another want and another want. And we're wanting machines. Abraham Hicks says this, that we are built in wanting machines.
Kids in a candy store.
Change,
Kids in a cosmic candy store. That's what we are. So and that's okay.
It's not just okay. It's the mechanism that expands the universe.
Desire.
This is the creation process. Like, let's lean into that. Just know that you're not always going to get it somehow perfectly on the dot because you don't even know what the dot is. And the whole purpose is in the journey of discovery. So if you can reframe your purpose to be the greatest discoverer of whatever in that drive-through, then you win. Yeah.
Yeah. We get to adventure with that here. So let's move it to Zoom. I just love everything we're talking about. And let's bring it back to this practical practice, maybe. Maybe you call them daily rituals of, I believe it's solving the unsolvable. Love it. Because we get blocked when we're in our head too much. I believe the mind is the body. I'm sure you believe that too. We're talking about the mind. We're not just talking about our brain. Our entire body is our mind.
Yeah.
So how do we use our faculties? Because you talked about sensory anchoring. Like if you feel like you got triggered or something, you grab a sensory anchor. I totally am on board with that. I do that all the time. But let's just say somebody is just stuck. Let's just use the, a lot of people, we brought up a relationship already. Let's say if somebody is in a relationship where they're like, I don't know if this is healthy for me to continue. I cannot figure this out. I cannot solve this. What are some practices that you would employ to be able to get somebody into their knowing around an issue?
I think you already gave the answer in our earlier discussion, which is the knowing is a collection of clear wants that you have acknowledged and admitted and expressed. So start acknowledging, collecting, admitting, maybe eventually expressing, but don't worry about expressing yet. And it starts with micro level. What do I want to eat for lunch today? Not what I told myself I should eat, not whatever. You don't even have to follow the knowing that you receive in that moment. Maybe you want a burger, but you told yourself you should have a salad. Fine. But just start admitting the wants, right? And at a level where it's practiced enough, where you're like, do I actually want to brush my teeth right now? Or am I just doing it automatically? Do I want? If you can ask yourself 15, 20 times a day, what do I want? Or I would even rephrase that question, because want can be a charged word, especially for women. I would say, what would feel better? What would feel better? And sometimes what would feel better, there's nothing that what would feel better. What would feel better is to have a glass of water. So I go and get a glass of water. I would not want a glass of coffee or to go outside or to do anything else. So it's starting to use our inner guidance, like with small daily things that will, how do you get to the big knowing, the big clarity? All of those steps that add up and take you to the big thing. And then it will be the next natural step for you to know, there's parts in this relationship that are not working for me. And you cannot, this is something that I love knowing, that you cannot know it enough. Like you cannot admit it to yourself, and it not shift in your life. The universe will act on your behalf because your desire is king or queen. It is what moves things in your life. So you don't even need to go tell that person, stop this behavior, don't do this, or do this instead. It'll shift in your energy field, right? So really the work is being, admitting, feeling, knowing, expressing, allowing. Active allowing, right?
Which is not for people who have my personality. I'm a very go-getter, ambitious, achiever, and I'm tempering that male energy that sometimes I can go into unhealthy masculine. It has served me. I've been able to manifest almost everything I've ever desired, which I don't say that in a boastful, egoic way. I'm actually really humbled by it at learning this process of creation. But I can see
I bet your most enjoyable manifestations were where there was an element of allowing greater than others. Because frequently when we create from a place of achievement versus allowing, it comes at such a cost. You're almost like, well, F it. I don't even want it now.
Because when it comes, you don't feel the fruits of that. Yeah.
Because if you're not allowing, you're not allowing the actual receiving of it either.
Exactly. And so for me, it was just taking what I had attracted to me and looking and examining, I don't have to hunt stuff down. There's stuff that shows up, which is that law of attraction, right? It's just I pulled it here.
You are that powerful.
Because that desire was so strong. And I used a lot of it back in the day around scripture, faith without works is dead. And I was like, okay, I can desire all I want and have faith, but I've got to do something. I've got to actually alchemize this in some way. But even before faith is desire, and letting desire work in and through you. And like you said, most women are I had to work through wanting to have wealth, wanting to travel throughout the world, wanting to do all of these things that women traditionally have been shamed for doing. I had to work through all of that, getting a degree, anything, Well,
how about the fact that Eve was punished for her wanting to eat an apple?
Yeah. We could go down a whole
right. I mean, there's this goes deep
that's
and
kind
far.
Of where the meanings that we've attached to these stories that have put us in these roles of shame I prefer Lilith, to be honest with you. The myth of Lilith.
I don't know the myth of Lilith.
Oh my gosh, go look it up. So she was actually considered to be the first woman in some folklore and myth and legend. But yeah, it's just, and she is just like, I want what I want. And I know who I am. And heaven help the man or the person that comes between me and this fierce.
Isn't that why we were born? Like, you would be born somebody else if you were their desire mechanism. You are literally in your body that you can't get out of until your last breath. You're born as you into your sets of collections and experiences. How could that not be a part of your purpose?
Sure. And I have to be really conscious because I have a lot of kids, and I have to be really conscious of them saying that they want something and not shaming them for wanting that. And it's been like, that's beautiful that you have, but then there's those impulsive ego forces that we have to teach them to temper that they think is a genuine want. Right. So there's a whole spectrum around.
Yeah. Well, that's where
you could want heroin.
Yeah.
But when I gave that analogy about the drive-through, like, if I don't want what's being offered in this drive-through, I reserve the right to go to another drive-through, and hey, maybe it's not a drive-through. Maybe I'll walk in and so we get so narrow in a prescribed set or a dictated way of doing things. And what I think we're talking about is just living into that miracle of who you are and honoring and allowing both the light and the dark, whatever we want to say there. I mean, I even hate that analogy too, because then it gets into good and bad and right and wrong.
Yeah.
It just is.
We're rainbows.
we're the whole spectrum. And okay. So anyway, back to these daily rituals. So is there just a couple things that you're like ironclad, like, these things are universal. These things actually help people to get baseline.
Yeah. Check in with yourself in some way that feels better for you every day, and continuously discover, learn ways that is meaningful for you. So the only thing that's consistent in my life is that I will check in. How it looks, what I need at the time changes, and the practice of asking myself what I need has become very normal for me. But initially, it was the practice of asking what would feel better. Yeah. Do I really want this? Right. So we already talked about that. The other part is it's a direct response to, if you don't want it, if you don't feel better, start stretching yourself a little bit by saying no, or moving away from it, or giving yourself permission to not do that same thing that doesn't feel good to you, right? So it's like finding some boundaries in that. And you can apply this to meditation. You can apply this to work projects. You can apply this to any area of your life, which I think all of it is a spiritual practice in my vernacular.
Life
so I don't feel like
spiritual practice.
Right. Yeah. And so I feel like it's about bringing this into your life, not just, I could tell you, yeah, sure, I have a visioning exercise here. You can open up to this page and you can do it. But it's why and how you do it that matters more than the what that you do. So pick up a book like this, try different things.
How do people find your book, Lana?
They can go to manifestthatmiracle.com.
Okay.
And they can get the first 3 chapters for free to check it out. And then they can order it on Amazon and a billion other bookstores and get it in audio form or paperback or whatever they want. Connect with me. Find me on social media. I talk about the concepts in this book. But again, the idea is that I can't tell you some cookie cutter, go do this, because the point is that you discover what you need. Now, the other part is that there are things that you don't know about that will serve you better than doing breath meditation, for example. I have a gratitude walk practice that I did for years instead of meditation,
because you needed
moving my body.
Probably needed to move that energy. And if you're just still trying to breathe and be all it wouldn't serve you at that time.
Exactly. It's like the principle for EMDR, right? You're moving your eyes. You're doing, there's connections that you're making in the body that make it easier for you to express and experience things. Use that. Find the path of ease, of safety, of relief, of a little bit better. That is going to take you a hell of a lot further than trying to establish some structure, some ritual that somebody else said worked for them or decided is the right thing for you. Nobody can ultimately be the expert on you. The great thing is that you can develop expertise for yourself that will allow you to feel like you've got your own hand through life, that you've got an inner source of support that you can access and utilize. Like you can develop a real relationship with yourself the way that you'd develop a relationship with another person that will be life enhancing and expansive and in service to you. And that is a practice. And how you get better is you practice.
Yeah, exactly. Like anything. And it's that, I think it's repetition is mother of skill or something like that. It's just like you said, and it was those small bank account type daily things that over time, created this new pattern, and all of a sudden a shift happens.
Yep.
Shifts don't they can. I'm not going to put a limit on miracles. Shifts rarely happen in an instantaneous. It's usually a buildup, and usually the universe, God, angels, however you want to frame it, is sending you piecemeal, like breadcrumbs. To your miracle. Yes. And when you have, as the scriptures say, when you have eyes to hear and ears to see, or what the opposite of that, eyes to see and ears to hear, and you are noticing and observing, and you're creating that safety. Yes. Then you are in a space to receive. Yeah. But only, I think sometimes we think we're ready for the miracle, but maybe we haven't done enough of the internal work to be able to receive it in a way that could really benefit us.
Yeah. You're ready when it's there. Is what I like to say. And it doesn't mean you're bad for not being ready. So we had this extraordinary twin home birth where I had 6 days of labor at home, and the kids were born 33 hours apart. So they have different birthdays.
Wow.
And so it is a miracle.
Chills right now. I've never heard of that. I've heard of twins being born at different times, but 33 hours? 33
hours apart. I only know one person in the world who is alive that has twins born 4 days apart, but that is a very unusual. We're like featured in midwifery journals and things, right?
Wow.
But the truth is, like, people want to focus on that miracle. Like, oh my God, how did that happen? They don't want to focus on the 10 years of personal development I did for the, you know what I mean? I'm like, this did not just happen.
Yeah, you were intentional with that, and you allowed it to be what it needed to be, which is what all birth is, metaphorically and literally.
Yeah. There's a saying in yoga that I love, which is enlightenment is accidental. You can't make it happen, but practicing yoga makes you prone to accidents. So miracles are not something you're going to make happen. Mm-hmm. But if you are practicing the miracle mindset, which I talk about in everything we just talked about, you're going to be very prone to accidental miracles that flow in.
It's kind of like karmically positioning yourself.
Yep.
And we are, speaking of karma, and we'll kind of wrap with this, like everybody has their take on it. But for me, it's just, you've been prepared for this time. The fact that you're walking, breathing, and living in 2021 and everything that's about to take shape behind it, we have no idea. But it's like, that is not an accident. And you are the miracle that is needed in your sphere for this time.
Yes.
For your own soul expansion, as well as for the lifting of others and the collective and humanity and whatever. So, okay, I love that we've talked to people about how to get your book. I'm going to go get it. Any parting thoughts that you'd offer with our listeners?
Yeah, I think the other part is I have kind of a rascal part of my personality that comes from my grandfather. And I talk about in chapter 2 of my book. I don't share too many personal stories because I want it to be like, go practice this and test it for yourself. But the stories I share about my grandfather is he went through World War II and became an orphan with his twin brother and lived through hardships that, I can't imagine. Most people can't imagine today. But he just had this attitude, like, if you can't laugh at it, then you've lost everything. And so my last parting thought is, this is all very deep and very serious, but please have some humor with it. Lighten it.
I need that right now.
Right. And find the sad satire, the humor, that like be able to laugh at yourself, laugh at the world, because that is really what lightens the whole experience. And I feel like that's really the highest form of enlightenment, is it has the word lighten in it.
Yes. Yes. Thanks for that. Yeah. Cause I love to just go right to the heart and the deep and just that also what I'm being shown and taught. And when this episode airs, I'll be in Costa Rica, right in the middle of sacred plant medicine journey. And one of the things that I have been taught and am trying to like embody and just rest into is exactly what you just said, and I feel like that's why the universe brought me children later in life. Like I have college age kids, and then I have a 6 and an 8-year-old. And they are one of the manifestations of the miracle, talking about creation and what I've learned about manifesting. They came through 2 separate private adoptions. I literally called them here. I saw them in vision, and they came through 2 separate birth mothers. But now that they're here and they're so like 6 and 8, and they're just turning life upside down, I keep being told like they're your masters.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how old your children are now, but how old are they?
I've got 10-year-old twins and a 4-year-old.
Okay. So you're in the same vibe of children, like same developmental. Yeah. So they time and time again show me what it's like to be present, what it's like to play, to allow my emotions. Like if I need to throw a temper tantrum, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes. They're masterful.
And so that would be kind of how I would wrap this and I'm glad you brought up the lightning, because yes, we can talk about all this shadow stuff and all, but ultimately we get to play, and no one gave me that permission that life was a playground.
So if you're listening and you need permission, take this as your permission to play whatever it means to you, and just watch the miracles that will follow.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to take our word for it. Give yourself the permission to explore and see the results.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Lana. That's a great way to wrap. So go find your sensory anchors, find what creates containers of safety for you. Get into your body, feel what is, allow yourself to feel and create that safety so that you can let whatever needs to surface arise and then be transmuted, addressed, assimilated, and not fighting who we are, good, bad, or ugly, right? Just letting things be as they are, holding that space for ourselves as we move through this beautiful journey of life. Have a glorious, glorious week, and we'll talk to you next time on Women Seeking Wholeness.